Good morning. I'm going to tell you a bit about Joomla ACL this morning. Good morning. I'm Sander Potjer from the Netherlands, living over there next to Amsterdam. I'm involved with the local community, organizing the local Joomla days in the Netherlands, user groups, local community, but also in the international Joomla community leadership team, CLT as we mentioned it. And the CLT is responsible for everything besides the funding, like that's OSM, Open Source Matters, for the funding and the trademark. The production of Joomla is, the code is the production leadership team. And everything besides that, like the websites, the extension directory, that's all the Joomla community leadership team. I'm a member of that, and I'm the ACL manager developer. Already for now, the slides will be published at slideshare.net/SanderPotjer. So you don't have to write everything. It will be published just after the session on that website. So Joomla ACL. It took a while to get where we are at this moment. In October 2005, so that's about 7 years ago, meanwhile, Johan Jansen, also walking around, I haven't seen him this morning, but he should be here, did a presentation about the roadmap of Joomla. At the time, he said that full ACL will be introduced in version 1.2 of Joomla. Good morning.
Good morning.
And version 1.2 was planned for the first quarter of 2006. I don't know if you're already around, working with Joomla around that time, but you may have noticed that version 1.2 never has been released. We have Joomla 1.0, 1.5, and now 2.5. And now finally in 1.6, but that's meanwhile the same, not supported anymore, so we have a releasing strategy of 1.6, 1.7, 2.5. Forget about 1.6 and 1.7, we are talking about 2.5 and 3.0 today. If you have a website, I don't know if you have a website with 1.6 or 1.7, it's better to upgrade it. It's not supported by the Joomla project anymore. There can be security issues. There are security issues. So please update your website to 2.5 anyway. But ACL, what is ACL? ACL stands for Access Control List. That's a nice term. And in Joomla, we have kind of two areas where we see that ACL coming back. One of these areas is the access part of the website. So you can define who's able to see a module on the front end. You probably recognize this drop-down list, public, registered, special, where you can select modules, articles, if they are visible on the front end of the website most of the time. The other part of ACL in Joomla, and this is something that's new and improved since 2.5, is the user actions on objects. And those objects can be anything, like components, categories, articles. That really depends on the extension. I will explain it later on. And we have all kinds of actions like new, edit, publish. Those are actions. And those are the two main parts of Joomla ACL, but different. And we will mainly focus on this one first. Will of you have used 1.5, Joomla 1.5? Okay, most of you. And also using 2.5 already? Looks around a bit to ACL, tried, or yeah, tried. Yeah, that's often. Okay, so to get a kind of overview of what's the difference between 1.5 and 2.5, and it's also similar for 3.0 that just have been released last week. We're going to look at both versions, see the differences to kind of understand that concept. In 1.5, we all recognize those 7 user groups we had: public, registered, author, publisher, etc. Those were a fixed group, and we couldn't add any new groups without extensions. The core was very fixed. They had a specific structure as well. In 2.5, we can define those user groups ourselves. When you install it, you will have the same user groups as in 1.5, but we can remove it or add new groups to it. Also the structure, like is there a parent user group or is it the parent of the public group? You can define it all yourself. In 1.5, you could only assign a user to one specific user group. So you can only say this user is super administrator or this user is publisher. You were not able to say this is both publisher or editor. Not logical as well. But in 2.5, again, that's completely flexible. You can assign a user to as many groups as you want. Not that that's the best solution, because it can get complicated, but it's possible to assign a user to more user groups. In 1.5, and I explained already, there were two parts, the access level part of Joomla ACL and the action part. We had, sorry. We had 3 fixed access levels: public, registered, special. And the relation between the user groups assigned to the registered and special group was also fixed. Like the special user group were all user groups like editor, publisher, they were all by default assigned to the special level. So if you assigned an article to be viewable by the special access level, all those user groups were able to see that. In 2.5, once again, we have the same groups by default, but you can add new access levels to it. And as I explained, there was a fixed relation between those groups, good morning, and the access levels. So, good morning, Martijn. Yeah, it's at 10 o'clock, right? And in 2.5, 3.0, any combination of those user groups and access level is completely flexible, and you can assign it yourself. So, the action part in 1.5 was very fixed. We had several actions: create, edit, delete. And those permissions were available for the entire website. So we might recognize this scheme of Brian Thema, published it once on his website. We have, this is the 1.5 scheme. We had several groups, front-end groups, back-end groups, and each group was able to do a bit more on the website. And if somebody was able to edit content, it was all content, not specific in one category. No, all content on the website, and that's the same for articles or banners or modules. They were able to edit it all. So the permission scope was for the entire website. In 2.5, we have those kind of actions by default: create, edit. I will go into that later on. But extensions can also add their own custom actions to it. The permission scope is getting more difficult because you can assign those actions for the global website, but also for a specific component, for a specific category, or even for an article, for example. That makes it complicated, but we'll go into detail that on later on. One another very difficult thing, and that might be the most difficult thing for those who already try to work with Joomla 2.5 ACL, is the inheriting of permissions. So you set permissions for one group, and the other group inherits that as well. But also for the scope. So when you set something for the global configuration, it also is for the components or the articles underneath it. We'll go into those inheriting later on because it's very important for 2.5 ACL. We can have a kind of structural overview of those 2.5 permissions. And it's all the same for 3.0. There's some differences I will explain later on, but most of it is the same for 3.0 as well. We can define the Joomla ACL system in 4 parts. We have a user, we have permissions, so what can I do? Create, edit, delete. We have a group, and that's a group of users, and we have access level. Those are in relation to each other, and let's have a look closely at each of those groups. Morning. First, the user. A user, we all know the screen when you edit the user is now able to assign to multiple groups. But it's always good to remember that a guest on your website is also a user. And that's also a user group now. Those users, and that was the first group, and then we have the core permissions, and at the moment we have 10 actions by default in Joomla. We have the site login, so who's able to log in on the front end of the website. We have the admin login, who's able to log in on the administrator side of the website. We have offline access, and offline access is when you put your site offline, you have a login box, and with this action you can define who's able to log in at that time when your site is offline. That is a new action since Joomla 1.7, that wasn't there before. Then we have the super admin action. And the super admin is only available in your global configuration of your Joomla website. Once you allow the super admin, so you say, okay, this action is allowed, will result in a kind of super administrator we know from 1.5. So once you allow super admin, the user group will be able to do anything on the website. On the lower levels, that action change in configure. And configure means that you can define which user group is able to change the settings of a component, for example. So those are, and then at last we have the access component. That means, of course, who is able to see and access the component, for example, in the backend. Those are more the component-wise, and then we have several actions specific for articles, categories, or example. That's create, delete, edit, edit state, edit own. Edit is to really edit an article. Edit state is not always clear for people. That's to change if it's something published, yes or no. Is something featured, yes or no. When is something get published? That's the edit state action. And edit owns mean that a user can only edit their own items. We have that in a global configuration, but also in many other areas around the Joomla website. And where you can set that per user group. And we will go into that later on as well. So in the center of this whole, there's the group. You assign users to a group, but you also assign the core permissions to a group. And it also means that you cannot directly assign permissions to a user group, or to a user directly. So you always have to create a group where you assign users and permissions. Always late. So the group is central of the ACL system. And a group is a group of people, of users with the same permissions. Those permissions are inherited between the user groups. So in this example, when you set permissions for the manager group, the administrator group will inherit those permissions as well. That makes it very difficult. Those groups you have, as mentioned before, by default, you can also remove those user groups. And that's not a bad idea. They are just there for easy migrations of 1.5 to 2.5. But when you do not use those groups, just delete them. It makes it easier to understand. Also, the nested groups, only use them when you really know that it saves you time. So when just one small differences in the action set is different, then you should use nested groups. Otherwise, I would suggest to just use a flat structure, so only manager assigned as nested child group of public, registered of public, so the inheritance is not working down the tree. It will save you a lot of time. One new feature in Joomla 3.0 is the guest group. And that's very useful group because in 2.5, those who tried to work with it before might have mentioned that you want something visible, like the login form, just for your guests on the website. But once they logged in, you want to hide that. So with the guest group, you can assign a module or article, for example, and once the user is logged in, they don't see that anymore. So it's very handy user group. Then we have the fourth part of it, and that is the access levels. And that's what people are able to see on the website. Access levels are used by article manuals, modules, plugin, where you can select is it visible for the public group, for the registered group, the special group, or any other access level you have. Those permissions, or when you assign an author to the customer access level, and I had to correct this because I found out that they are inherited. So when you assign the author to the access level, the editor and publisher will be part of it as well. It's also important when you, and that's very difficult, when you assign a user to the backend of the website, so they're able to log in on the backend of the website, it's important to assign them to the special group as well. If you don't assign that user to that special level, they will be able to log in the backend, but don't see any menus or control panel buttons because they are not able to view it. It's one of the mistakes made very often. So this is the relation between those items. As explained before, we have the permissions. For each action, you can set 4 options. We have not set, inherited, allowed, and denied. And you can use that on any object on the website. And let's have a look at those items. The first one is not set. We only see that in the public user group in a global configuration. That's the base of Joomla. When something is not set, a user group is not able to perform that action. You really need to allow something before a user group is able to perform an action. So that's the base, and not set is actually the same as denied. Most of the times, and it's probably suggested to simply leave the public user group not set. The next one is inherited. That means that the value is inherited from the user group above or the level. And I will go into the level of global configuration components later on. But inherited means that the permissions are inherited from the user group above. You can assign that all around Joomla. Good morning. Then we have the permission allowed. So once you have not set anything, you can allow it on a later on for example, create, you allow something, and then the calculated setting will be allowed. So then a user group is able to perform that action. Those calculated settings are only visible when you save your configuration first. So when you change the drop-down, it will not directly be visible. You really have to save it first before the calculated permissions are visible over there. The last permission, the last option to select is denied in a drop-down. And the denied is a very difficult one. Once you use the denied for an action, you can't change that for a user group below or any other lower level. So once you denied something, it's a hard denied, you can't change it. So it's best to try to avoid the denied as long as possible. Yeah, sure.
If a user is member of multiple groups,
Mm-hmm.
and one group has allowed and one group has denied.
That's a very good question, and I will answer that later on in my session. Okay, explained already that there are 2 ways of inheriting the permissions. One is the user group, but the other one is the levels in Joomla. It's not really official called levels, but I use it always to explain it more easier. The first level is the global configuration, where you can set the permissions. You can find that in global configuration, and then there's a tab permissions with all user groups listed and all actions. Most of the times you will only use in the global configuration the site login and admin login. And not really those specific actions if you don't want it. If you allow create over here, that means that the user group is able to create any component as well, items in it. So most of the times you will do it in the second level. That's the component options. You will use the create action, for example. You can find the component options. So for each component you have those options. When you go, for example, to the article manager, you have the option button on the top right. And when you click on that, you get the options of that component. Again, many options, of course, but one of them, tab, is the permission. And then we have the actions specifically for this component. And that can be different between the components in Joomla. You have the articles with specific actions, but the banner module of the banner component has different set of actions. You also probably noticed that there are less actions available. We don't have the site login, the admin login, and offline login anymore as in the global configuration, because those are not valid for a component. They are site-wide actions. So we have here configure, access component, which user group is able to access this component, create, delete, edit, edit state, edit O. The next level is the category level. The settings you set in the global configuration are inherited, the component options to the category options. It's possible that you haven't set anything, so not set is denied, denied. And then in a category, specific category, you want to allow a user group to create articles in that category. So you can allow it over there. To make it easy, the category permissions are set on a different way. when you open a category, you have the permissions with the button set permissions. When you click on that, your screen will scroll down, and on the bottom of it, you have again the same kind of permission overview. But again, we have less actions. We don't have the access component in configure anymore. Because we are already in the component, the access component is only for the entire component, and configure is only for the entire component as well. So we only have really the edit for the object action. So the create, delete, edit state, edit only. You can set that for each category. So you can imagine when you have a lot of categories, you can have a lot of these kind of screens where you can configure those settings. There are handy tricks to prevent a lot of work, and I will explain that later on as well. The last level is the kind of item level. And in Joomla core, we only see that with the article manager. And the item level, you can set the permissions on the same way as the category. We have the set permission button, and it scrolls down to the actions available for that item. And you only have delete, edit state. You can't create an item in an item, so the action is no longer available. Again, you can set it for any article, but that's probably not the way you want to do it for each article you created. It's only useful, for example, when you have created a specific article, you don't want to allow a user group to edit it. So, for example, you can say the edit is denied, in this case, for this specific article in this category. All other articles in the category user groups can edit it, except this one. One very important thing is that once you set the denied action for a component, you can't change that for a specific category or item. Once you set the denied action, you can't change that anymore. Denied always wins, and that's later on also with multiple groups for a user. A bit more visual. For example, we have the create action, and we have user groups over here, registered, author, editor, publisher. They are nested of each other, so the author inherits the registered permissions. And on the other hand, we have some backend groups, manager, administrator, super user. In this example, we allow the create action for the component for the author. So we see that it inherits to all categories below. So all categories in that component are also allowed. But also the nested user groups. So the editor inherits this allowed value of the author group. And the same for the publisher. So you see, once you set allowed, it goes two directions, to the groups below, but also to all components. And in this case, not the articles, because the create action is not available for an item article. The same in the backend, for example. For the manager group, we allow this nested administrator group inherits that value. The super user, that's already a different group that will allow anyway. And when this is in a global configuration, and that means that he's able to create for any component in the backend. So not just, for example, the article manager, but also for the banners module or the newsfeed module. And it's inherited down to all categories as well. What will happen when we deny something? In this case, we deny later on for a specific component the create action for the publisher group. That means that he can't create anything for all categories below. If we would have changed the value for the editor group denied, also the denied inherits to the publisher group. So the publisher group can't create, but also all categories below. Once there's a red denied, you can't change this, for example, to allowed anymore. So that's why it's important to prevent to use those denied as long as possible. So you really start with it is not possible and allow user groups what they are able to do. Some denied example on the other side, we denied for the administrator group and it will inherit it down all levels in Joomla. In Joomla, and I already explained a bit, there are a lot of actions available you can set all around the website, all with their own separate permission screen. Those available actions vary between the components. For example, when we look at the plugin, the component is also a component, we don't have to create and delete action available, because you install plugins via the installation manager. You only can't change the settings of a plugin or publish it yes or no, so that's the added state value. So it's not that all actions are available for all rows. And as explained, we have many screens. We have the global configuration. We have per component the options with the permission screen. So when you have 20 components, you have 20 components with those settings. And we have for each category, imagine you have about 100 categories, another 100 screens, and 1,000 articles, you have another 1,000 of these screens with permissions. That all can be very complicated to understand. So the first time I tried to find out how the ACL system worked myself, it was back in one of the betas of 1.6, I really had difficulties to understand it myself as well. Normally I just install, check out Joomla and understand each feature, but I really had to understand. So I started sketching and created at the end for a bootcamp we had in the Netherlands an overview with Excel where I can make an example. What, for example, when I deny the delete action on the global configuration. You see directly that it's going to pull down all other actions in your Joomla website. And this is just for one user group. Once again, when this is red, you can't change it to allowed anymore. So later on, when I finished this presentation at that time, I thought, okay, maybe this is a way to understand your settings of Joomla. And after a few months of trying and playing around, I was able to create ACL Manager. And ACL Manager is an extension by me where you can have a good overview and manage the permissions for the user groups. This is the dashboard screen. And when you click on a group, you see an overview of the permissions from the global configuration, level 1, a specific component, level 2, article of a category, level 3, and article, level 4. This is for one specific group. So you see that this group is able to access the article manager and also able to create because that is set in the global configuration. Via ACL Manager it's also possible to click on the icons and the state will change directly. So it will directly visible when you make managing the permissions. One of the other options when you were playing around, many people play too much and get stuck. So that's why I introduced a reset function that you can revert to the default Joomla permissions or clear simply all permissions for the user group so you can start over again. One other thing is errors in your assets table. I don't know, those who are playing around with ACL, I asked in the beginning, were migrated websites, but often that is going wrong. A lot of migration tools, and meanwhile as they are getting better, I think JUpgrade did some improvements recently. Yeah, but in the past it wasn't working that well. All the assets were simply the wrong values of the parent or the level, so it slows down your website, but also makes that you don't understand the settings because you think you're doing it right, and you think, okay, this user should be able to do this, but then it isn't working, and that can be an issue. You can be right, but it can be an issue due to the migration. Also, the Joomla core has some issues, not really correct in the default sample in the sample data. So ACL Manager is also a tool to detect those issues, find missing assets for components that are not available, and also detect admin access conflicts. And that means that you assign a user group to log in the backend, but you don't assign them to the special viewing level. So they can log in, but will not see anything. It will detect it as well. On the website aclmanager.net/de, this is the German version, you will find more information about it. And I don't know if I have a flyer with some discount as well. In Joomla itself, meanwhile, during the development, they also find, okay, it might be complicated to get an overview. So it's a bit hidden, but there is a kind of debug system as well. When you go to your global configuration, you have the debug system. When you turn that on, and you go to a user manager or group, you will see a button, Debug Permission Report. That's only visible when you turn on debug mode. When you click on that button, you will get an overview of all actions as well. So it's a kind of like ACL manage, but in this case you can't click and change it. So it can be a useful overview as well to see what is this user group able to do, or the user. But I don't know, who ever turned on the debug mode? I know a few there in the back, but who can tell me what happened more when you turn on the debug mode? Maybe you recognize this? All queries, etc. are visible on the front end of your website. So each time when you want to see via the normal debug mode of Joomla, you have to turn on that function, but at the same moment all this information will be visible to all your visitors on the front end of your website as well. There are ways to prevent that and hide that, of course, but it's to keep in mind that you don't need to leave the debug mode on your live website, because this is kind of interesting information for hackers, etc. So what about the database? I don't know if you're really developers, you have a few, of course, but all assets of Joomla are stored in a new table since 1.6. It's called the assets table. And over here you see an overview with the ID, the asset ID, of course, what is the parent level, and in the end it all turns around these rules. The rules are stored in JSON. I will not go in detail to this. If you want more information about this, find me later on and I will explain it all, because I don't think it's interesting for anyone, everyone over here. But this is how the table looks where all permissions are stored, not in any other table. What's very important when you start working with ACL is to plan your ACL implementation up front. And we can say that for many other things, but for ACL it's really important. You can of course start playing and then you hit a roadblock and then solve it, but you will save time. Think about, is the issue I'm trying to solve for my website, is it a viewing problem, so who's able to view articles or menus, or is it an action problem, who's able to create content or delete it? Those are separate areas in Joomla. When I started explaining, you have the access levels and you have the action objects. So those are two different things, and you need to have different ways to solve it. It's the viewing problem, you have to work with the viewing access levels. It's about creating content, you use the permissions for the actions. It's also important to think ahead. What will happen when the users start using the website? What if I need to add 20 new categories? You can better create, for example, when you have 20 categories with all the same permissions, create one parent category and nest all categories below. Because you can set the permissions for the parent category and all nested categories will inherit those permissions. So that saves you 20 times for each category to configure those permissions. So make use of those nested possibilities of the categories since 1.6. And it's also not needed to set the actions per article. Do it via the categories only when you really want to prevent some user group is editing the group. Some notes with the Joomla ACL. This is your question. What happens when you have a user assigned to multiple groups and each group has their own set of permissions? For example, we have a user group with the Netherlands, it's called, and that user group is allowed to edit the Netherlands category. But we set denied for the Germany category. We have another user group, Germany. That user group is allowed to edit the Germany category, but denied under the Netherlands category. When we now will assign a user to both groups, what will happen? He's not able to do anything, because denied always win. So we have a denied on the Netherlands and a denied in Germany, so the user group is not able to do anything with the categories. To prevent that, we simply do not need to set that denied. If you haven't set the allowed, of course, on a higher level, but make your category structure that you only allow the Netherlands category, leave it on not set for the Germany and the other way around, and then a combined group will inherit both allows, so he's able to manage both allow sections. Another thing that might happen when you start playing around with Joomla ACL is that you get this message. at a certain moment. You're not authorized to view this resource. And you can't click anywhere around and you lock yourself out. There's a simple trick to resolve that. You don't need to access the assets table and try to find which values you need to change. You can open your configuration.php and add this line, public, root user, and your username or user ID. And once you set that in your configuration.php, you are able to log in again and do any actions. It's not looking at the permissions anymore. But don't forget to remove that line after you get yourself access again, restore the permissions. Don't forget to remove that line. Joomla will help you with it because there will be a big message visible. Remember, this is the emergency mode to log in. Click here to remove that line and the website is normal again. Some practical ACL tips when you start using it. It's very important to write down your ACL requirements for the website. Really think ahead what user group is able to do what, and think how you can structure that properly with the category structure, with your user group structure, and the permissions. You can save a lot of time when you spend 15 minutes on thinking about your implementation first. Those Joomla 1.5 user groups, the kind of default structure we have, you're able to remove them. It's really just for the backwards compatibility that those user groups are available. Get rid of them, start creating your own user groups, and you will understand ACL better because you start configuring from scratch on. Use those nested groups only when you really know for sure that that's the best way to use those nested groups. When only one action is different for a specific component, for example, but all other actions are the same for the user group, then it's useful to use nested group. Otherwise, don't do it. Just leave it as the highest level. Mentioned it already before. When you assign a user group to access to the backend of the website, you also need to assign to the access viewing level, and most of the time it's a special default group. All modules in the backend, like the menu, the control panel, are set with the viewing level special. So your user group that's able to log in on the backend needs to have that access value. Also mentioned before, but can't mention it enough, try to avoid the denied action as long as possible. When you use the denied action, you will not be able to change that later on. So really try to prevent it via using a different structure of your categories or user groups. You can also think about use role-based groups. And what do I mean with role-based groups? Is that you have create a group with a manager of, for example, the Germany category manager. Give that a group name and create the permissions so that user group is able to do that specific action. When you have a list of those roles, like a manager of the articles, a manager of the banners, you can really assign per user. He's able to do this specific task on your website, or this task. And once again, then it's very important to prevent the denied action. I have a link where is an article explaining that role-based setup of your permissions. Let's see, I have a few minutes left. We can do a quick example. I have here some additional resources, and I just want to give a quick demonstration how you can set up a Joomla access to one specific component, for example, on the backend for a user. Let's get it to this screen. So this is a fresh Joomla install. Totally with the default settings, but we now want a user group that's only able to, let's say, go to the article manager and managing the articles over there. I start with adding a new group. And of course I can use the default ones, but it's easier to start a new one. And I use the parent group public, so it's totally blank settings. I now go to I first will assign a default user to it to test around with it. a new user, test, very secret, more secret, and I assign that user only to my new article manager group. What I normally do is open a new browser window, and it's open in this screen, to see if it's working right. So let's copy this. With the new user, I'm not allowed yet to access the backend. So I first need to configure the backend access for this user group. So I go to the global configuration of Joomla, click on the permission tab, go to my article manager group, and say you're allowed to log in on the admin. You see, it's not changing directly, but once I hit save, it will change to allowed. So when I now try again, I should be able to log in the backend. I'm able to log in, but I don't see a menu. And this is because this user group newly created is not assigned to the access viewing level yet. So for that, we go to the access level. And we have the special viewing access level. And we need to assign that newly created group to it as well. Save and close. Oh, cool. Oh, not working. So need to save it. Okay, so now it's assigned to that group. Let's refresh it. Still not there. One other important thing. When you change access viewing levels, that is stored in the cache of Joomla. So you have to log out and log in again to be able to see those changes of your access viewing permissions. That's one mistake that people make very often. They said, I changed it, but I can't see the articles yet. No, log out first, log in again, and then it will be visible. So now I log in and I see the control panel. My menu is there, a button, and by default you will be able to edit your profile. The help menu is visible as well, and some information. Of course, you can change that by changing the viewing levels of those modules. These are modules as well. In the menu module, you can also configure that the help menu isn't visible in the backend. So, but the user is still not able to go to the article manager. For that, I go to the article manager, click on the option button, go to the permissions, and say, okay, no, not for the public group, article manager group, you're able to access. And for this, it's working directly, so for this you don't need to log in and log out. It's directly visible. We now see the content tab with the article manager and category manager. One question that you often see as well, am I able to hide the category manager and only show the article manager? No, that is not possible yet. When I now go to the article manager, I see all articles, but can't click on it. It's not working. If I want to allow edit, I need to allow the edit permission. So, allowed, save, refresh it. And now I'm able to click on it, edit it, and save it. But still not able to create it. For that, I will use a small other example. I only want this user group to be able to create articles in, let's say, the module category. I will click on modules. Oh, I have to do that in my other browser. Normally, when you're logged in as a super user, you have those set permissions button. But of course, this user don't have the permissions for that. So I will go with my administrator account. Go to the category manager. We'll use another one for the quick example. And say, okay, in this category, components, you are able to create new content. Save and close. Go back to the user. And go back to the article. And now I see there's a new button visible. When I click on that, you see that only the categories are able you allow to access to. So you are now able to really find a user group is able to create content in one specific category. So in this way you can, oh, that's fixed in 3.0 I saw. So this user is now able to create articles in the component and edit all others. You can of course change whatever value you want with them. So there's several steps needed to do that. In ACL Manager it's a bit more flexible. When I click on the article manager group and I'm working with the article component at this time, I see the values I just configured. He's able to log in on the admin, able to access the article component, edit everything in the article component, so all categories and items, but he's only able to create new content in the components category. In this overview, I can simply change the values for it and hit the save button, and you don't have to navigate to all those different screens. And of course, if I don't want this user to be able to edit the content, you're able to deny it. That's the only way that I suggest to use the deny feature. So this was a quick example, and you can of course expand it with any component. It depends also per component if it's possible to configure the actions. Some components adding additional actions. I think Nicholas, you did it right for backup, for keeper backup, for example. You can define the action who's able to download the backup files, right? Yeah. So there, Nicholas added a few additional actions to the default Joomla action. So that can depend on the components. You can be very flexible with setting up these kinds of websites. And I see kind of more and more people are looking for also extensions that are using this permission system. Like download systems will be great if they don't use their own permission system, but using the Joomla system. I will be around for questions. I don't know if there are for now quick questions. You can always find me later on today and ask your questions. But yeah?
Is there an easy way to hide the articles?
No.
It's not able to edit? Or?
At the moment, when a user is not able to edit, you will always see the articles in the overview.
Yeah.
But you can't click on it. Yeah. But it's on my list to work it in the Joomla core. So that there will be a kind of option that you can simply say, okay, instead of it's grayed out, it will be hidden. Yeah. So I hope to have that in 3.1 or something. And I will also add that as an option to ACL Manager first as well. Because the question is there more often.
Is there a strategy to handle pictures which are added to articles in the access control?
No.
They will remain public as long as...
Yeah, there's at this moment there. Brian, you have to
use JCE as your content.
Yeah, that's right.
Then you can set JCE up to use folders specifically for the user.
Yeah.
So when I log in and I go to upload images, it goes to /images/ my username, and the images go there. And then when you log in, the images you go to /images your username, and if you're using the JCE methods, then you can limit your access to only the images.
Yeah, you can create really specific user folders for their files.
But
in the Joomla,
outside of the Joomla ACL.
yeah, in the Joomla core, it is not possible. And it's also not possible, for example, there's a question you heard often to set those permissions, create, edit for your folders in your media manager. That's not possible. No. Ronnie, you had a?
Yeah, two things. But in general, you say that perhaps the media manager is also kind of what could be some love in Joomla onwards.
So if anyone want to help with that, you're welcome to improve it.
I just wanted to hear on how's the progression on ACL rules for modules.
Yeah, I've been. I think there are at the moment a kind of 3, maybe 2 features that are most wanted. For example, permissions per module. So you are able to say you are allowed to edit this specific module. At the moment, you can only set the permissions for the entire module manager and not per module. The same for the menu manager. You are able to create and edit all menu item, all menus, but you're not able to set specific access for this menu or this menu item. I have been working myself let's see, I need to go to GitHub. On the permissions per module. And I've made already a pull request, so is it called like that? Let's see, where is my pull? And that's this one. And with this code that is already there for a couple months, you will be able to set the permissions per module. But it needs testers to get in the Joomla core. So if you have some time, please test this pull request. And I will blog about it on my website soon as well. Because once this will be in the core, you are able to define the permissions per module. It's not that very exciting, big change, but it needs to be tested to get into the Joomla core. One other thing I'm working on is the permissions per plugin. So the same for the plugin manager. It will be not used that often, but once you have the module manager, plugin manager, and the menu manager done, we are able to really create good configurations of ACL. Yeah, that's also needs testing. Shut down your internet. No, but okay. The answer is yes. Somebody else also made a pull request, also waiting on testers. So testing, if you're interested, I'm happy to explain you later on how you can test it, so you can say it's working, so we get that in the core. Other questions around? One other important thing when you start working with ACL, it's always good to check if your extension you start using is using the Joomla ACL as well. There are still too many extensions not using even the basic actions like configure and access component. So when you don't have those permissions set, the component will be visible in a backend anyway. So you want to have components that are allowed to set those permissions. In ACL Manager I have those a kind of trick, you can set it anyway, but I would like to see that all components use those permissions themselves instead of using other extensions to allow that. So thank you. I will be around, and just find me if you have any other additional questions.